Hello, this is Ellie from the Math Center, and today we're going to be talking about graphing sinusoidal functions. So here I have written the general form of a sinusoidal function. We have y equals a sine f times x minus b plus c. So all of these variables have a significance. A, for example, is called the amplitude. Here we can see that the amplitude is the distance, or is the maximum distance from the center of the graph to the peak, or the distance from the center of the graph to the lowest valley. Then sine is a function that comes from taking the sine is a function that takes in an angle and produces a number. F is called our frequency. X is our variable. We have an x-axis and a y-axis. B is our shift left and right. And C is our shift vertically. So it's our shift up and down. So using all of these components, I like to think of it in 3 steps in order to go from the function to being able to graph it. So the first step that I do is I determine the period. So here we can see that the period is equal to 2 pi over f, our frequency. So later on you'll see, but you can take this coefficient out front here, put 2 pi over that coefficient, that gives our period. The period is when you go along the graph and go back to the same point. It's one cycle of the graph. The second thing that I do is I graph the sinusoid, ignoring these coefficients b and c. So ignoring the vertical shift and the horizontal shift. So this is graph while ignoring shifts. And the third and final step is apply the horizontal and vertical shifts. Let's start out with an example. So in the first example, I'm going to actually set my b and c to 0, and we're going to have an example such as y equals 5 sine of x over 3. So in this example, the first thing we will determine is the period. And the period is going to be 2 pi divided by 1/3. 1/3 is the coefficient of x in this case. So this is going to equal 6 pi. Now, we can draw one cycle of sine. The parent graph of sine starts at the origin. So we are going to graph it by going up, coming back down through 0, and going back up. So this is one cycle. It goes from the origin, from the x-axis back to the x-axis. This is one cycle or one period. So we know that one period here is going to be 6 pi. Half a period is going to be 3 pi, and it starts at 0. This number out front is our amplitude. So our amplitude is going to go from positive 5, and our lowest point is going to be at negative 5. Our center is at 0. The reason our center is at 0 is because our c value here is 0, so it's not shifted up and down at all. So we're going to do an example now, another example. Y equals 2 sine 4x plus 4 pi over 3, all of that minus 2. Our first order of business is to factor out our frequency f. So this would then equal 2 sine of 4 times the quantity x plus pi over 3. All that minus 2. So this indicates an amplitude A of 2, a frequency f of 4, a horizontal shift B of pi over 3 left, and a vertical shift C of 2 down. So let's find the period. The period is equal to 2 pi over f, which is equal to 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. So now we can do the first graph, the graph where we ignore the vertical and horizontal shifts. This graph is going to look like sinusoid, or a sine graph, but slightly squished. The reason it's slightly squished is because the period is much shorter. It's no longer 2 pi, it's pi over 2. So we have pi over 2 over here, 0. It crosses right at pi over 4. And our max is 2, our minimum is negative 2. Now let's apply our shifts. So the first shift is that the 0 is going to go to negative pi over 3. And our pi over 2 is going to move pi over 3 to the left. So we have pi over 2 minus pi over 3, which is equal to 3 pi over 6 minus 2 pi over 6. This is equal to pi over 6. So that's where it ends, pi over 6. Also, we have a shift down. So our max is going to go from 2 to 0, and our minimum is going to go from negative 2 to negative 4. So our center here is going to be at negative 2. We're going to start here. Our graph here, pi over 4 minus pi over 3 is going to be negative pi over 6. So we are going to go up, cross down through this, go over, and have our minimum be at negative 4, our max peak go up to 0. So in the end, this function, y equals 2 sine of 4x plus 4 pi over 3 minus 2, will have a graph that looks like this. I hope this helps, and see you in the Math Center.